morning and good afternoon, everyone. I am Tamara Ecker, Managing Director of British American Business, speaking to you from a very busy New York City. And it's a pleasure to welcome everyone to today's event discussing how to create more inclusive workplaces, especially for the LGBTQ plus community. Our goal today will be to provide some insights on how to build inclusive policies and practices and support employee resource groups and ally initiatives. This event is part of British American Business's STIR series, discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion against a backdrop of US and UK businesses. It is a series built in partnership with our members to address these cross-cutting issues regardless of sector, geography, or company size. In fact, the STIR has become a central program line for BAB, thanks in large part to our sponsors who are ACCA, Broadridge, EY, Fitch Ratings, National Grid, Siemens Financial Services, and Virgin Atlantic. To help us tackle this topic and lead us through today's discussion, we are lucky to be joined by Stuart Sadek, a partner in Heidrick & Struggles Boston office and a member of the professional services practice. Stuart serves in leadership roles in the global consulting and advisory services sector and currently serves as co-lead of the firm's LGBTQ plus ERG, Pride at Heidrick. Stuart, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tamara. It's great to be here. Great to be here with the panelists, and to those who have joined us, welcome. Looking forward to a great discussion. A couple of house rules, if I could go over them first. We are going to have a discussion for about 40 minutes, and then we will have the remainder for Q&A. You will have the opportunity to use the raise hand feature, which I think everyone on this call is likely familiar with, having used Zoom before. We also will have the chat window open, and we'll do our best to monitor that. But again, toward the end, please do think about your questions and use the raise hand feature. We would like to ask if you would please keep your mics on mute when you're not speaking to avoid any background noise. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be shared upon completion. There'll be a turnaround time, but it will be shared. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our three panelists, and I will mention their name and ask them to introduce themselves. So if we could start with you, David Jones.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Jones. I work for Collar Capital, which is one of the founding firms of the private equity secondaries market. I work at Collar as the head of HR, talent management, diversity and inclusion. I spent just over a bit more than 20 years in HR, and prior to joining Collar, I was 10 years at Barclays Bank, where I was part of their Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Council for the firm, but I also was the co-chair of Spectrum, which is the LGBT plus employee resource group as well.
Great, thank you, David. Purika, if we could ask you to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Purika Sampson. I'm the Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity for Gilead Sciences. We're a biotech pharmaceutical company based in Foster City, California. However, we have offices in 35 countries and a very large contingent in Stokely Park. And prior to joining Gilead Sciences, I was a member of the diversity and inclusion team at Morgan Stanley.
Great, thank you. And Melanie, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, all. I'm Melanie Veens. I work within the UK Directorate for ACCA as the Sector and Community Lead. I lead the team on key focus sectors to support our membership of finance professionals. And I also chair an ACCA internal LGBTQIA plus community for staff of the community and allies.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. So we do have several questions that we have thought about in advance. And I would encourage, again, you as participants to think of the questions or comments you might like to add during the session in chat or at the end with the raise hand function. As well, for each of our three panelists, please do feel free to dialogue, challenge each other. This shouldn't be a sequential speak and move on. So with that, I would like to start with you, Melanie. What does inclusion mean to you? and to your organization?
Sure. So inclusion to me is about embracing all people, acceptance, and an overall feeling of togetherness. For my organisation, since ACCA's founding in 1904, ACCA has had a core value of facilitating a profession that is open to all. Inclusion, along with integrity and innovation, are now ACCA's 3 core values, which link back to the unique reasons for the creation of ACCA more than a century ago. So I think from that statement, it's in their DNA.
Great, thank you, Melanie. I think it's such an important starting question. Purika, your comments on what inclusion means to you and your organization.
Sure, thank you. At Gilead Sciences, inclusion is one of our core values. It's critical to our culture that everyone is included. They have a sense of belonging. They feel like they can contribute. Innovation doesn't happen if people are not able to share truly, fully who they are. But we also want to ensure that people not only can contribute, but they can thrive in the organization. And certainly as the head of inclusion and diversity, I'm a big advocate for inclusion. Couldn't be doing my job without it. So, but it is very, very important for us. And we'll talk a bit about how we execute that going forward.
Great, thank you. David, how about your comments?
I mean, I actually agree with both of my colleagues on the it's a feeling, it's a place where everybody is included, and it's where difference doesn't get in the way. Difference actually is to accelerate business performance, where the diversity of views, opinions, background, choices that people make actually are additive to a business. Homogeny, we know, does not cultivate innovation, creativity, or advancement. So let's embrace that and use that as a power to drive a business going forward and drive a place where everyone can thrive.
Thank you, thank you. Just add one brief comment from Heidrick and Struggles perspective. I would say that inclusion is also for us about understanding that there are many different dimensions of an individual. Intersectionality and particularly as I think about our employee resource groups, our ERGs, enabling people to come as they are, where they may not have knowledge about, for example, the LGBTQIA employee resource group that I co-lead, but enabling them to come without judgment, to come with question, to come with their own bias. So just to add that. So thanks again for your comments, each of you. David, I'm going to start the next question with you. And again, I would encourage you, Melanie, and you, Purika, to add in. How can you build inclusive practices into your hiring process, the front end, to signal the organization's commitment to LGBTQIA equality?
Great question. And I think when I was reflecting on this when it was shared before, I think this practice actually is applicable to anybody that is in a minority group. And I'd first start, for me, this is all about language, and actually being very careful and very considerate about the language that you use when you're out there interacting with candidates, your website, your marketing materials, your brochure. When people are looking to join an organization today, they're looking for a signal, an indicator that they feel that they could be part of that organization. And there are so many firms still today that are using over masculinized language. They're using terms that certainly are off-putting to people that are LGBTQ plus and women and people from an ethnic minority. You have to be so careful about the language. And I think being obsessed about that as a DEI professional, and also anybody that's in a talent acquisition role, is really, really important, because that's the first piece that helps set the fire burning, say, come join us. And then I think for me, then it's about being really clear and being really true to any of the policies and practices that you have, making sure that you're really clear as part of your hiring process as what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And that includes not just languages, but the questions that are asked, the whole experience that you're creating for somebody when they first interact with you as part of that vital acquisition part. And again, I see so many times where there are just assumptions that are made. And certainly for me, investment in hiring managers and leaders when they are actually in that place to say, don't assume anything, positive inquiry, think about the questions that you ask is just really, really, really vital. And then there are other things I think, particularly in around, how do you make allyship really visible? And I don't mean turning your logo to the pride flag in June and then switching it back again. It's about making sure that if you're going to do that, follow it through, making sure you signal that you're working with groups both internally and external to your organization. Celebrate that. Some of the best firms I see are making DEI 365, 366 activity. And I think for me, that's really important, that every point in interaction you're showing where you are inclusive and being very considerate of actually the talent that you're trying to attract.
Thank you. Others?
Yeah, just to add, and actually not really add much, but David used the word careful, and I just add and intentional. Right, we can be careful, but we have to also be intentional about, our policies, our processes, the language, where we show up to recruit and how we show up to recruit, and then what the experience is like, especially, as you're onboarding new people, so they see not only our verbal commitment, but just see it in action, right? And so we have a very, very strong employee resource group, Pride Alliance, and we talk about all of the groups, all of the employee resource groups being available to help people develop, their allyship muscle, right? And so showing people grace, understanding that not everyone knows everything, and there are different places on the journey, but showing grace to those who are truly interested in learning and growing in their allyship.
Great, thank you. Melanie, anything to add or challenge?
I think that was all really, really good stuff and covered it all. We also kind of look also to post roles on more inclusive sites. So just a little bit different from kind of the usual places that we'd post roles. But no, I think that was covered all.
The one thing David, please.
Sorry, just one thing that kind of I was just reflecting on what my colleagues have kind of said. I think the word intention I thought was brilliant in my mind, because you have to have intention and positive intention and be very deliberate about what you do. There's also consistency in my mind too, that actually you could have a great hiring experience and a really rubbish onboarding experience. You have to make sure that that is intentional and consistent right the way through what you're trying to do, because people make a judgment as they're going to stay or leave a firm within the kind of like the first week, really, in many ways. So how do you make sure that is pulled through and leverage ERG groups? And I think working with diversity specific recruitment firms are also really great. It's great practice. But also make sure those partners that are hiring for you from the regular recruitment agencies, headhunters, are also true to what you're trying to aspire to. And again, I've seen on occasions where that hasn't been the case. And it's just really, you have to be very intentional about who you work with, just to echo in that comment that was made before.
Yeah.
Which speaks very, very much to me, given our role as a search firm and leadership consulting firm. The one word I would add to everything I've heard is authenticity. The importance that all of these words, these actions, these processes demonstrate authenticity, because the worst is when a person joins the organization and finds it was more words. And then the one other piece I would add from our own experience at Heidrick and from working with clients is the importance that this is also coming from the top. That it's a value at the top, that it's expressed at the top, be it in our case, our CEO for certain, the leadership team, because that then cascades through the organization, as opposed to if it's down or off there with the employee resource group. So our next question, if we're ready to move on, Purika, I think we're going to ask you to focus on this one. What are some challenges organizations may face when attempting to create an inclusive workplace?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we're a global organization, and I actually came out of a global organization. And I think the one of the bigger challenges, or the biggest challenges, is the consistently upskilling employees just to understand what inclusion means, and that it's not static, right? People, identify who they are every day. Someone is, committing to who they truly are authentically and how they show up in the workplace. And so ensuring that our employees have the skill set, the information, the tools they need to be inclusive colleagues and leaders. I think that is part of it. Driving accountability, right, for leading inclusively. That is another thing. We always say, you don't want to drive inclusion with a stick, nor just a carrot, right? And so giving people the tools they need to change, to have the skill set, but also change the mindset, especially as things are always evolving. And then I do think recognizing those individuals and leaders who live out inclusion every day. And so sometimes people learn from hearing how their colleagues are doing things, and some of those colleagues do it naturally. And so how do we highlight those experiences? How do we leverage those experiences to sort of demonstrate what the magic really looks like when you are operating inclusively?
Thank you. Thank you. Melanie?
I think the biggest challenge for us has been around the location. Because we are global, there's different laws and acceptance of some countries we operate in. So some of the policies or things that we want to try and bring in we've had to be extremely sensitive. For example, bringing in pronouns. I mean, the amount of hoops that had to be sort of jumped through to get that out was quite something. And we had to allow that to be a decision for the employee if they want to use their pronouns, because of the effect that it may have in some of the countries that we operate in. So I think that's probably for us one of the biggest challenges we faced from my perspective.
Great. And how was it resolved?
So we created a policy for people to use pronouns, but it's not been forced upon anyone. Use them where you want to, if you feel comfortable. Some people might feel comfortable using them internally. So on their email signature, or there's a function that you can change your status in Microsoft Teams. So some people are using that. But it's a decision for each individual. But I mean, looking around the company and the people I've been communicating with all across the world have embraced it. So it's great. It's been great to see.
Great. David, your thoughts?
So I think some of the biggest challenges to this is actually leadership. And I know we mentioned before, actually having visible allies is really important. There are a lot of silent leaders in organizations that, are not out there driving inclusive practice within organizations. And some of that is because they don't know how to. Some of that is because it's a minefield, and it's something that people feel uncomfortable with, and some folks don't want to. But when I think about leaders in organizations, they are signal generators. Everything they say, everything they do, where they act, it reflects on the organizational culture. It reflects on the teams that they are leading as well. And if any of them are out of step in line, it kind of does diminish the power of inclusion practice and those that are actually really good at doing that. And if I reflect back, I think there needs to be much more investment in leaders being able to understand, continuously grow, continuously be curious in around what it means to create an inclusive culture, and really realize the benefits of that, because inclusive cultures, we know, innovation, creativity, higher performance, it's proven, it's in there. So how do we do that in recognition as well that we're asking people to operate in a really strange world where many of the times people that have worked for the last 20 years don't have necessarily the knowledge or the skills now to actually cope with this ever-changing, ever-volatile, ever-complex world that we are living in. So leadership, I think, is so important. There's an underinvestment, I believe, in actually driving an inclusive workplace, because we're not doing enough for our leaders to be able to do that. So they truly can become ambidextrous and create the time to be positively curious about people that are different that they're leading. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and they mentioned about, actually, we all understood each and every individual's why they show up to work and why they are on this planet. We then move much further in trying to create inclusion, help create understanding, and adjust much more quickly and much more easily to the challenges of working in a global, diverse organization.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
And one of the things I wanted to just quickly share is we hosted an inclusion week for the very first time. And so, you know, good or bad, thanks to technology, all the forms of technology, we're able to bring people together across the globe. And one of the things that we were able to do was highlight employees, but also leaders across the globe who maybe hadn't considered they were doing anything special, and you know, had them walk through sort of what it means to, you know, inclusive moments and how that showed up all over the world. And we had, you know, a US-based company, but 52% of our participants were outside of the US because of that desire to connect. So employees, all ages, gender, orientation. It was, you know, a great opportunity for your everyday colleague to share, you know, what inclusion looks like and how they live it out.
That's exciting to hear that. We're actually ACCA kicking off Inclusion Week next week. So we've got a range of activities set up to be able to engage with everyone. So that's cool.
Given the global nature of what you've just described, could you just highlight what challenges you had to address in aligning people around inclusion? Because I would assume people are coming from different places culturally.
Yeah, they were. So again, we had, you know, people from, you know, North America to Asia to, you know, South America to parts of Europe. And so a couple of things. One, just to remember, you know, reminding us all to be considerate of time and location, right? So everything can't be on our, you know, California time, but time and location, putting people together who didn't know each other. So we, you know, having people who work in parts of South Africa with someone who works in Italy, with someone who works in Mexico, and giving them a couple of days to sort of work together to talk about, you know, where there were similarities and differences. But, you know, really that was it. And the great opportunity for us was leveraging a technology platform that allowed for 24/7 access and engagement. So there was, you know, able to chat and video chat across the globe. So I'm a big advocate of technology right now and what it does to bring us all together.
Excellent. David, were you about to add something before I cut you off?
I was just saying, well, we're just completing our Inclusion Month, actually, not to trump my colleagues on that. Yes. But when I joined Collar, I was so passionate about, we were doing great stuff with the D, a little bit with the E, but not enough with the I. For me, it's the bit that wraps around it in many ways to create that conditions to allow the D and the E to thrive in this particular instance. And again, we've tried to use technology. We've tried to make sure that it's about great conversations, and we've tried to make sure that people spend enough time in reflection around actually what part they can play in helping to create that environment where the awkward question is asked and it creates great debate. It's the point where we are being considerate, actually, that our colleagues in Hong Kong and China are working in a completely different time zone. So let's be much more considerate to those folks there, that, you know, New York is 5 hours behind, California is 7 or 8 hours behind. All of those kind of things just nudge to a much more inclusive environment as well. And it's those little signals make a big difference, in my view, to actually how people think and feel about an organization.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Let's move on to the next question, if we could. And it's thinking about, if you will, the segments of our employee population, our cohorts. Younger, and I would say younger LGBTQ plus employees tend to be particularly diverse demographic. And from my experience, also a very vocal, willing to be very vocal, willing to speak, to demand, to, you know, to push, which I think is a very, very important thing. It raises the topic of intersectionality and the fact that there are many different needs. There are individual needs as represented by different groups, populations, identities. In your experience, when you think about how this all plays out in your organization, do we run the risk of treating LGBTQ plus employees as a monolith, or how can we address the fact that we have this rich, complex dimensionality? Purika, do you want to help us start with that?
Sure, I've been looking forward to this question. I really enjoy the opportunity to work with our younger employees, and especially those in the LGBTQ plus community. And the reason for that is, and I think, generationally, you'll probably understand, generations before, there are various iterations, but I think the most recent generation before of elders, let's say, were fierce, right? And everyone, you could describe these people, you knew who they were fierce, they moved forward, really strong conviction. But I think our younger generation, they're fearless, right? And they are going to hold us to it. They recognize intersectionality long before, the generations before them. They understood the importance of it. They do a great job of sharing and educating those around them. And so one of the challenges and one of the things I was most concerned about and had been for a bit of time is just ensuring that their voices were heard. Because, again, you have some strong leaders, strong personalities, who fought a good fight and tend to have pretty vocal about a lot of things. But you have this next generation coming in, understanding intersectionality, understanding the challenges that they have faced, and done so with, in some cases, some may say fewer barriers, and others they're more barriers because they're more transparent about who they are very early in their lives and their careers. And so that I think for me, just spending time, ensuring that this next gen, they get a chance to participate and be part of the leadership, especially in the ERGs, making sure that they're bringing us along, right, in many cases, and recognize the value that they bring in their fearlessness, right? And so they don't expect their careers to be torpedoed because they're authentically who they are. And it's the iteration of who we are, who people are under the LGBTQ umbrella. I mean, it's evolving every single day. And I've talked to some colleagues in this DEI space, and they're like, oh my God, it's too much to keep up with. But it's important to keep up with, right? And that the importance of, understanding the various levels of intersection, understanding the importance of transparency, and helping allies become greater allies by understanding what those iterations are.
With that in mind, has Gilead considered or introduced any kind of reverse mentoring programs?
So probably more informally than not, but I know, my team is fairly new. I joined Gilead a little over a year ago, and we're really doing a really good job, I think, of bringing just different generations in, recognizing, I look for that in talent, people who are really fluid and can move across various groups. But so not formally, but I am a big fan of reverse mentoring. I think it's something a little bit that we did at Morgan Stanley on the wealth management side. Great,
thank you. David, Melanie, anything you would add?
This is quite a touchy subject to think about, is LGBTQ plus one community, or is it separate, different? Again, there's lots of debate that's going on at the moment, very, very vehement opinions on either side. When I reflect back, I think there is such a power in bringing a community together, absolutely, and I think we should embrace that. But I also think we don't want to homogenize it too, and I think we need to recognize that one size doesn't fit all, and actually the whole point of why we try and understand intersectionality, because we are all different, we are of a different heritage, we are of a different socioeconomic background, and I think we just need to be very mindful of that in the conversations that we are doing, and conversations around and the initiatives that we're trying to drive through and forth within that, which is why it comes back to, actually, if you create a truly inclusive workplace, then you actually be able to embrace all difference within your organization. And I think it's just something, again, which comes back to language, it comes back to appreciating difference, and it's about actually, much like what we had in the UK, the term BAME, which I found highly offensive, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. You're putting this wonderful mixed heritage group into one acronym. I think, we just have to be mindful, actually, that as the world moves on, we have to appreciate difference, and it isn't one size that fits all. But, bring together the power of shared experience and community is also powerful. So it's a fine balance between the two, I think, in many ways. When I was at Barclays leading the Spectrum ERG group, what we tried to do was we've come together as a community, we link arms, but let's also honor and celebrate the L, the G, the B, the T, the Q, the I, the A as well, and educate and inspire and show just wonderful the richness of this group of people that have come together with a similar kind of challenges and adversity within the workplace.
Great, thank you. Melanie, anything you would add?
I think that was covered amazingly well. Yeah, I think just the most important thing is keeping an open discussion with everyone and allowing people to continually be able to be in a position to feedback, and also just to know they're being heard, and then be able to feed that back again of a decision either way, of if things are going to move forwards or whatever. But it's just to make sure people are listening and being heard.
One thing I would add that we have found effective here at Hydric is asking and enabling and empowering each of our ERGs to create forums for discussion and to co-sponsor those forums. So we have, I'm sure every organization has many, but we have found that also helps members of our ERGs better appreciate the dimensionality in other ERGs and collectively. And by the way, I think these tend to be like the best attended sessions when we do it firm wide globally, but for time difference. So thanks again for your comments. The next question is that it's almost easier for a B2C company, especially in retail, to signal their support for the LGBTQIA community at a massive scale. They have the ad money, they have the product, they have, the message is out there. What can B2B companies do to position themselves effectively as a supporter, advocate, promoting, the importance of LGBTQIA community? Well, I will start then.
Inspire us.
Good moment. I think from our experience and what I've observed in the clients that I've had the fortune to work with is clearly sponsorship, getting their name out, and sometimes even where it might be considered controversial. Not all organizations come to the market, particularly B2B, with a complete acceptance of the organization and all employees. And I don't want to go sector by sector, but really being willing to attach their name to an initiative, to sponsor a program, to sponsor. And it's not just sponsoring a dinner, it can be sponsoring a mentorship program. And I also have found, and I'm thinking in past history, certain organizations that have done it, have really done something wrong, have done something wrong as an affront to the LGBTQIA community and have fixed it, have been vocal in fixing it, have been, like we messed up, we screwed up, and we're going to do differently. So does that spur any comments from any of the three of you?
So we're B2C pretty much, and a little B2B, but I think recognize globally for our commitment to the LGBTQ plus community. But I would say this, it goes back to being intentional, being clear about what the expectations are, who we are, why we're here, and who we serve. And I think that's really, critical. I mean, we've obviously all seen the missteps that have happened, and they happen with, many communities, on occasion. But I think, again, leaning on your employee resource groups, those people who recognize those key segments, but sometimes the miss is no one's asking the question. They're not asking the right questions. They're putting together ads and knowing who's, should be, who's reflected in that ad is actually involved in the decision making. And so I think it's, again, being inclusive, elevating the dialogue, and ensuring that, voices are heard.
Great, thank you.
I'll
Dave?
just add on to that. I mean, ACCA is to kind of support membership, so that they have, they gather insight reports, and they've got insight reports on diversity and inclusion. So we utilize members who are within different communities to be a part of that, to share their experiences and their voice. And for us, that's then a way to use that piece of research to then promote out, obviously wider to businesses, but also to individuals themselves.
Great, thank you. As a quick reminder, I do want to ask all of our participants, think about the question that you want to put into this discussion. We'll use the raise hand. We're going to go to it in a moment or two, but please do think about it. We're wide open to whatever you want to share and any questions. David, was there anything you were going to add to that?
I was just reflecting on the B2B question, Stuart, really around, if an organization is really true to inclusion and celebrating diversity, it needs to be very public about actually the people that it won't work and do business with. And I think that for me is, I had a very lively debate with a head of business banking on one occasion where we were talking about, well, if a business that they wanted to work with said they wouldn't work with a trans business manager, they'd swap them out. And kind of with that, he didn't understand why that was the wrong thing to do. And it just creates a really interesting conversation. You have to be true to your values as a firm, and then hopefully diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of them. And actually zero tolerance, I think, about if you come across that if somebody was pro slavery or pro other malpractice, you would work with that business. Why would you do it if they were anti-LGBT or anti-T or whatever it might be in that particular instance? I think it's about being true to those values and being very clear in your T's and C's and your ethical statement about whom and who you're not going to work with.
Yeah, I also think of it as having the courage to make tough decisions, having the courage to lead. And it may be a risk, but invariably it would demonstrate courage and leadership. I'm going to go to one last question, and it would be, in your opinion, what does a fully inclusive workplace of the future look like? Just imagine fully inclusive workplace of the future, your own organization, other organizations. What would it look like?
That's an interesting question because, have the times changed even over the last couple of years. And from my perspective, it is one that it's a bit hybrid, that there are no walls or restrictions to your ability, your mobility within an organization. Everyone, inclusion, that's table stakes, right? You can't carry the card if you're not willing to live out those values. I think that's really important. And then, some of these missteps that we know can be alleviated are because, everyone's a part of the conversation. There is diversity on the team, diversity of, many elements of diversity, including, obviously thought and experience. But that's really it, just it is hybrid. It is, everyone has a voice and their voice matters no matter where you live in that organization. And it shows up in how we show up in the marketplace, how we treat our clients or patients or, the businesses that we work with. So.
Thank you.
For me, I think it's a place where everyone feels valued, and they can be true to their authentic selves, and probably wouldn't need to have so many discussions about how to be inclusive because we're all there already.
Yeah.
Excellent.
My default answer was, when we get true diversity at the most senior boards and executive groups, I think that for me is a major step forward and not tokenistic. It's about, those truly representing the clients and customers and businesses, investors that we serve. Absolutely, that's the first big signal in my view that kind of says actually we're much more inclusive than what we've been previously before. I also think it's about a different mindset as to how organizations nurture and foster their talent, and moving away from some of the traditional routes of pure academia to recruiting for mindset, recruiting for people that see the world differently. So neurodiversity, I think, is ever important in this, and it's about actually contributing to society at large and making a societal impact. I think that for me is an inclusive organization. But the list probably goes on and on, really, in terms of what it, I think it's much more, as Melanie said, it's about a feeling. In many ways, I can thrive because I belong here.
Excellent. The one thing I would add when I think about a fully inclusive workplace, one could say if we're fully inclusive, we no longer need to be talking about differences, possibly. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I would say fully inclusive means that we're continually able and willing to look at ourselves, because I think diversity will change. Mm-hmm. We don't know what diversity will look like in 2050, whatever years. Mm-hmm. And I think the ability to continue to ask that question of ourselves and examine it mm-hmm. continues to build the muscle in the direction we want to be going. So thank you. I do want to open it up now to questions from any of our participants. And I'm looking in the chat window and also looking for raised hands. Elizabeth, had you submitted questions?
Yes, I just wrote a message. Melanie was talking about recruiting from non-standard hiring platforms, and I would love to know some more about that. Feel free to name and shame or promote.
I haven't got the exact list. I don't sit within the HR capacity, so it's it's some of the guidance that they've shared with me. But I'm more than happy to share that afterwards with you on where they're using. If that's okay.
Lovely, thank you.
Great. Awesome. Thanks so much. Thank you, Melanie. Yolanda.
Hey, thank you for putting this on today. Firstly, I have maybe a two-part question. When you talked about your Inclusion Week and your Inclusion Month, can you describe a little bit of some of the activities you had during that time? And then overall, how do you assess that these things are actually working?
So I'll start because I aspire to David's Inclusion Month, but for Inclusion Week.
I forgot to mention Inclusion Year at High.
So for Inclusion Week, it was a combination of, lectures, but there was, interactive components. So we invited some noted speakers on the topic of inclusion. We actually had a virtual scavenger hunt, which was pretty cool. A virtual exhibit hall that really featured our employee resource groups and other groups that we use to serve our employees. And then we had a virtual lounge, so you could pop up and say, "Hi, I'm Yolanda, and I'm interested in learning more about you or sharing about X." And again, that was a 24/7 platform technology experience. But it was those kinds of things, recommendations of books and things like that. But literally, you could virtually engage in an exhibit hall, talk to people in the booth, and then obviously there was some exchange of information. Really cool platform.
Great. David?
So we approach it in three ways. It's around communication, coordination, and education is the basis of anything that we do. And as part of our Inclusion Month, we had a lady called Laura Listwood come in and speak about what inclusion means for her. She's a real character bit of a force of nature. And we had our most senior investment professional actually interview her as we call it an in conversation with, very standard kind of stuff, audience participation, etc., which worked really, really well. We also have a series of events we run regularly throughout the organization, which is, it's called What It's Like. And this is really about how we get our colleagues to come and talk about their lived in experiences of being different. And we did it in honor of Asian American Pacific Islanders and talking about actually the lived in experience of those. And then I also had an Olympic gold medalist from the UGB hockey team come and talk about the connection between inclusion and performance, to really try and create the hook, if you like, to kind of say, actually, we don't just do it because it's fun, it actually does make a big difference. And actually what the things they did to create an inclusive team that eventually went on to win an Olympic gold medal. It sounds like we spent a lot of money. We didn't spend a lot of money. Actually, it was about, you know, beg, stealing and borrowing on many occasions. And actually our colleague session was hugely attended and actually goes down really, really well. And in terms of the measurement piece, I mean, these things are really, it's vitally important, I think, in the work that we do in this space. We have our regular DEI pulse and our DEI engagement survey. So that's how we will measure this. But also I canvass, I'm lucky, I work in a very small organization at the moment, so I can go around and say to people, what did you think? Actually, what did it, what did it make a difference? And I'm particularly proud of the stuff we did around inclusion and performance. Actually, was one of our investor relations managers said to me, it was the best corporate event they'd ever been to. Yeah. So I think I'll take that as a bit of a win in that particular instance. What I love about these events is that when you walk around, you actually hear the conversation has started. Yeah. And actually for me, then it's about how then you foster that coming through. But that's the kind of thing we wanted: variety, we wanted it lived in experience, we wanted it done actually driven by the colleagues. And then we try and measure it as best we can through our surveys and through anecdotal feedback.
Yes, and one thing I failed to say, so we, measurement, absolutely, real-time measurement was important, but we also pulled together a working group who reflected people in different parts of the world. So they had a chance to contribute to the planning and, the session development. So there was a bit of that, and then inviting experts in, and last year or this past year for us, it was during Asian American Pacific Islander Month, and so our speakers, were noted speakers like Professor Kenji Yoshino and Richard Louis, the MSNBC journalist. So it's pretty cool in that way. We were able to integrate some of those things, but those pulse surveys, absolutely. We did create a real-time intranet specifically focused on Inclusion Week, and so to see 17,000 people read an email or click on a link was pretty cool. So
Great. Melanie, I think you had also talked about Inclusion Week.
Yeah, we kick off ours on Monday. So we actually partner with inclusive employers. So they've kind of shared lots of resources on how we best do it. So we're kind of basing all of ours on different themes for each day. So creating the LGBT community plus HR are kind of building the platform, which is hosted on our internal site. But like Monday's kicking off with the power of identity. So we're going to share videos of ourselves from the LGBT community to try and make people want to be able to come and talk to us. You may not, there's 17,000 people at ACCA. We want to be the people that people want to come to and be able to share things with. So identifying ourselves, then like the Tuesday, we're looking at the power of connection. So trying to enhance people reaching out to each other, which I know was mentioned earlier around different countries coming together. The Wednesday, we're looking at the power of recognition. So we're going to have like tweet sheets and get people to really try sort of say thank you to somebody or recognize somebody for something. Then we're looking at Thursday, the power of a diverse network. Again, that's bringing these networks together, and we'll host things. We're going to host a quiz, which also is on the inclusive employers site, just a bit of fun, but also people are learning, and that's that knowledge share piece. Then it's the power of knowledge. So we're going to be sort of sharing articles. Then it's the power of allyship. Again, there's lots of resources we've already collated or created as a community. So it will be about sharing that and inviting people to be part of the community. And then the final day is the power of commitment, which I know, David, you mentioned, and it will be for people at ACCA to make a pledge. How are you going to be inclusive, not just this week, not just this month, but for the next year and moving forwards. So hopefully something we can build quite an impact on, and it'll be quite fun for everyone.
Excellent, great. The one thing I would add from our perspective is in our employee resource group, which is known as Pride at Heidrick, not particularly original, but it works. We want to make sure that we are engaging the conversation throughout the year, not just in Pride Month, not just in coming out month or coming out day, by using outside speakers, inside panel speakers, a Slack channel, ongoing communication, realizing that there are many different times that people are open to the message and the theme. So to us, recurring is one of the important things. And I think that's probably relevant to our other ERGs as well. Other questions? I think we have time for one or more if anyone has one. Then what I will do is turn it over to the panelists, your final thoughts. As you've reflected on preparing for this session, the theme, as you reflect on the discussion we've had, what final thoughts would you share with our participants?
I'll start. I mean, again, it's always great to engage with colleagues around the world who are in this, on this journey with us to, bring inclusion to life, to help our organizations and our colleagues, leverage inclusion in the very best way. And I loved Yolanda, who says I'm stealing every one of these ideas, which is great because that's what it's all about. So that's what it's all about, really sharing those best practices, because collectively we will move, not just our organizations forward, but society forward. And so, always pleased to participate in these discussions, contribute, and certainly take in all of the learning. So thank you so much for having me.
Great.
I'll just add, I think being a part of a community and chairing that community really gives me insight into what HR are working on, and being able to be the voice of the employees to the business and to that HR function. So I really do see the value in companies having those internal groups to be able to even just contribute anything to, or be just heard again. So.
And my final thoughts are, I truly, we need to get our leaders to truly believe that inclusion is a business driver, and anything that we can do as a group to help educate and inform and make that link for them, I think is vitally important. I think we also have to give ourselves time to do these things, because change doesn't happen overnight. We also need to make sure that we are looking after ourselves and are resilient as well, because there are a number of things that will derail, and it is constantly, as we've said before, it's constantly evolving and constantly changing. So a degree of resilience is really, really needed. But just make sure that everything, wherever you possibly can, is in alignment. Make sure the words, the actions, the policy, the practice, the process is aligned, because if you're not, and any of those are out of sync, you derail all the work that you're trying to do. So just be obsessive about the language, about the practice, the policy, and where things go wrong, learn from it really fast and remedy wherever you can.
Thank you to each of you for your closing comments and for great participation and comment throughout. The one reflection I would share is I get excited about this topic and about this work because I think of the difference we can make for others. I think that at this stage in my life and career, it's about being there for others, be it mentoring or having a safe conversation. And these are not conversations that existed way in the past. And so how fortunate we are that we're able to talk about this, that each of you and our participants in the session are in the incredibly impactful roles that you are in. And again, to be so grateful for the impact it's having on others, and you probably don't even know how much of an impact or on whom. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing. Thank you for being involved in this session today. And with that, I am going to again say thank you and hand it over to Alice Mount, who is the Executive Director for London of British American Business. And a big thank you to British American Business for making this happen.
Thank you so much, Stuart, and to you, Melanie and David and Parika. I found that really inspiring, and you yourselves are inspirational guest speakers. you don't have to be on MSNBC or TV to be inspiring us all today, and looking at the comments and really fantastic things that you've shared with us today that I think many of us can go away with and start implementing some similar very cool initiatives. I mean, Melanie, your Inclusion Week and each day dedicated to those 7 topics is really helpful. And Stuart, you talked about how important it is to learn from our mistakes and move on. And I know it's hard to talk about the mistakes sometimes, but when you do open up and confront those and share them more widely, then we can all learn from the mistakes as well, and not have to go through the same painful process. And Parika, you talked about how important it is to find people who can be fluid, who are comfortable moving between different groups. And I think that was such an important observation, because I think that fluidity is such a wonderful attribute to have. And it's not something you can learn easily, but we can model it, can't we, in terms of how well and how comfortable we feel moving around different groups. And in a global environment that many of us work in, we have to be so sensitive to local customs and beliefs. And it's only through that sensitivity and giving people a choice and modeling great behavior that I think we can help collectively change the world. Again, Parika, you talked about that. And David, absolutely, going back to looking at the business case for this, and those great reports out there from our friends at McKinsey or whichever consulting firms are doing this, where they are showing again and again that inclusive behavior, inclusive practices really changes the bottom line and profit margins and employee retention and recruitment. It is so important, and keeping your customers happy at the end of the day, whether they're business customers or consumers. So I can't thank you enough on behalf of British American Business and the entire team. You've given us so much to think about, and it's been an absolute pleasure to spend this hour with you. So thank you, Nicolina and the team, for putting this together. We'll see you all at another one soon in our STIR series. Thank you all.